All right.
There we go.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, which is what source-to-pay leaders should know about robotic process automation. My name is Malvi. I'm a marketing manager with working with Zycus. I will be moderating this session today in collaboration with our expert group of panelists, Jon Hansen, Mark Hubbard, and Wendy. Before we start, a few housekeeping tips for you all. At any point of time, you may send us your questions in the question and answer box right down at the WebEx. We will try to take them along with the session as we proceed, or they will be addressed towards the end. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about Zycus. So, Zycus is a leading global provider of complete source-to-pay suite of procurement performance solutions. Our comprehensive product portfolio includes applications to support both the strategic and operational aspects of procurement. It is with tremendous pride I want to say Zycus has been recognized as a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for strategic sourcing application suites in 2017. We have also been named the same leader in 2013 and 15 as well, and for the consecutive year in 17, we have been named as a leader. A little more look at Zycus. You can see the Gartner, where it has positioned as leader and why it has positioned as leader. A little bit about our upcoming thing. So Horizon, it's Zycus flagship event. After 6 successful events across the US, Horizon is all set to make its way to the heart of Europe. Horizon 2018 Europe edition will take place from June 10 to 12 in Prague at the luxurious 5-star hotel Voskolo Autograph Collection. It will be a 3-day conclave, hosting forward-looking procurement and financial executives, industry experts and analysts, to deliberate the new and emerging trends that will shape the future of business performance. We are promoting it right at the website. If you want any more information, you can write it to us, Horizon EU 2018@zycus.com. Now, a few words for our today's expert panelists. First of all, I would like to introduce to you Wendy Lawson. Wendy is directly advisor services at IACCM. She utilizes her legal information technology background and experience to collaborate with corporate, public sector, not-for-profit and organizations and individual members to drive IACCM projects and initiatives such as contract automation, standardization and design. She's also a member of the Law Society, the Society of Computers and Law, and an associate member of the American Bar Association. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
Our second expert panelist is Mark Hubbard. Mark is currently Managing Director at Smart Brown Dog Limited and is also an experienced management consultant and trainer, specifically in the field of team management, strategic purchasing, supplier relationship management, and negotiation. Having established positive purchasing in 2003, Mark has also significant experience in managing a business from startup and throughout it. In 2014, Mark set up a Smart Brown Dog Limited, which is focusing on the development of marketing strategies, advanced procurement support, and sales training. Mark is also a thought leader and expertise in several areas of procurement practice. Welcome, Mark. And now, our last panelist, Jon Hansen. Jon is working with Procurement Insights as the editor and lead writer for the Procurement Insights blog, which has more than 25,000 followers. Jon has written more than 3,000 articles and papers, as well as 5 books on subjects as diverse as supply chain practice, public sector policy, emerging business trends, and social media. In addition to being a must-sought-after speaker and moderator internationally, Jon is also the host of highly acclaimed PI Window on the World Show on Blog Talk Radio, which has aired more than 800 episodes since its initial broadcast in March 2009. A 2-time Ottawa finalist for the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year Award, or of a group of 15,000, Blog Talk Radio named Jon Hansen as one of their top 300 hosts. So now, without wasting any more time, I would now pass it over to Jon to start the webinar.
Thank you, Malvi, and welcome, Wendy and Mark. It's kind of interesting. This is our first foray into doing a video version of webinars, and as you probably gathered, I look nothing like my picture. In fact, some people say I have the face that's made for radio. So I'm going to have to maybe update the picture a little bit. What do you think?
Definitely an adjustment to doing video from just pure audio, I'm sure.
That's right. Let's not be a distraction. Listen to our words. Anyway, welcome everyone. Glad you're joining us today. I want to remind everybody that following the webinar, we're going to be having a tweet chat on Twitter under the hashtag RPA2018. Now, this Twitter hashtag is active for about a week after the event itself, and what it does is enables us to solicit and obtain insights and ideas and thoughts and discussion regarding the subject matter of robotic process automation. So I encourage you to join at any time. Again, about 30 minutes after the webinar concludes, the first poll results will go from there. So just a reminder on that front. And now, let's go to today's agenda, because I think this is an interesting topic, because I have to tell you, when I look at robotic process automation, different things come into mind, perhaps a generational perspective, but robotics certainly doesn't come to mind outside of the framework of what we know of robots or something automatic, or you think on assembly line, but it's quite different when you move into the realms of the procurement world, as you'll find out as we talk with both Mark and Wendy. But today's agenda, we're going to focus on 3 areas. What is robotic process automation? How will RPA be used in the procurement process? And of course, how will procurement benefit from RPA? Now, I want to remind everyone here that this is very much an interactive experience. So you're going to be participating through a number of polls that we're going to do live, and we would invite you during the entire presentation in the chat session. We've done this many, many times, to get involved, to post questions, to post comments. I'm certainly going to be asking you in the audience questions so that we have this dialogue going, because you're an important part of this entire webinar piece here. It's not a unilateral discussion coming out from us, but we want to be able to engage with you as well. And these are the areas that we are going to be focusing on. Now, let's start with the first thing. What is robotic process automation? As you can see the robot there with the hand up, that's the, I guess, the traditional thinking in it. And I'm going to introduce our first poll, and Malvi, if you could trigger it. On what area will robotic process automation have the greatest impact? Will it be on improved operational efficiency, optimization of processes, improvement in compliance, better risk management, cost reduction? So while Malvi cues that up, I want to turn first to you, Wendy, and then to you, Mark. When you look at this first poll, what immediately jumps off for you? And again, we're not influencing the participants in terms of what they vote, but what comes to mind in terms of where you think the area will have the greatest impact? Wendy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it goes to operational efficiency from my standpoint in putting resource in the optimal areas. So in other words, you're using people for things that are they're best suited to, and replacing those functions within an organization where something that can be automated is slotted in place of a human being. And so it's efficiency not only in the other areas that are listed there, but overall efficiency of use of resources.
So, Mark, carrying on with Wendy, and which of these do you believe is going to be the most popular? Which do you believe will be the most area of impact? What are your thoughts?
I think the interesting piece here, John, is thinking about the areas in which we often see greatest challenge within the procurement function. And there's 2 areas that particularly interest me here. One is the operational efficiency at the front end of the typically the requisition to pay process, and how we can make that easier, faster, simpler, and what that looks like. But my background is very much in the area of looking at supply relationship management, supplier performance, and the area that I'm really interested in here, which I guess fits into operational efficiency, is thinking about how we can get far better and up-to-date information on the way in which suppliers are actually managing to perform, and finding ways to do something positive with that in a way that is particularly useful for our organizations.
So now, if you look at it and take into the context, the operational efficiency, the optimization of processes, I mean, are we venturing into the realms of artificial intelligence with robotic process automation? I mean, it's designed, obviously, to reduce the necessity for the procurement people to handle mundane tasks, for example, and frees them up to be more strategic in their thinking. But to get to that stage, I mean, is this the movement into that AI realm that everyone's talking about, and the digital transformation that's encapsulating or capturing everyone's imagination?
If I can jump in there, I think it's sort of the first. For a lot of people, I think it's their first jumping off point in terms of it's an easy entry into that process towards automation, because you're not having to adapt your systems, you're not having to purchase new software and expend a large amount of budget. You're able to just step in and put these systems in place and see immediate results. So I think for a lot of people, as I say, it's a jumping off point. In terms of AI at this point, not so much, because that's a little further down the line for a lot of these companies to get involved in. But a really good solid first step that people are just beginning to realize, I think, that they can take that step and then start to look at their other processes to see what else they might start doing within their business.
So in other words, and Mark, weigh in on this, so realistically speaking, and Wendy, if I understand what you're saying, we're just at the very beginning. And I don't want to digress too much on this, but carrying Wendy's thought a little further, Mark, when we think of AI and artificial intelligence, what we're talking about now is the initial step where functionalities, common repetitive functionalities are utilized through RPA, so it frees people up. What will AI look like going forward? And I know I'm sort of digressing, but I want to jump to that, because a lot of people, when you think about process automation, look at it and say, well, artificial intelligence, it'll do more work. I mean, what will that look like? What will the evolution look like?
Well, I think part of the interest in here is actually thinking about what we're attempting to achieve with a lot of the process automation and the ability to analyze that we're looking at. What we're really trying to get to is far deeper insights into the sorts of behaviors that we're doing. So we're looking for efficiency to start off with, but then we're looking for insights that we can take actions on to generate further efficiencies on the way through. I think the AI element, in part, and certainly not in whole, but in part, we'll be looking at ways of trying to deliver that far better set of insights for us, because the challenge of getting data, insight and knowledge out of a huge mass of data still remains to be a significant challenge for many procurement organizations.
So again, and that goes into a whole other realm of big data. So let's look at the poll results. Improved operational efficiency seems to fall in line with, Wendy, your thinking, and optimization of processes. Cost reduction, how might that occur? I mean, you know, that's 25%. That's a quarter of the people who've responded. Where do you see cost reduction happening, Wendy?
Well, cost reduction is essentially when you're removing a person and replacing it with an automated process, whether that person would be offshore or outsourced personnel or in the country. Essentially, people are more expensive to engage in activities. So when you're replacing a person who needs vacation, time off, doesn't work 24/7, with a piece of code, essentially, that's just following repetitive actions as long as you want to run it, you're going to have cost reductions there. And, of course, the outflow of that, slightly linked in with the risk management, of course, is that, you know, the machines aren't making the mistakes. And with the best will in the world, if you sit somebody down and try and make them do something time and time again, you're going to get errors. It's recognized that is just part of being human.
So basically, again, and that goes to your comment, the earlier process. Right now, we're just on the earlier stages of it. By the way, Emil weighed in saying, I think the poll is lacking one option, all of the above, with a little nudge and wink. I think, Emil, you're right on that. In the context of the fact is, eventually, all of the above will roll into the equation. Now, anyone else who's responded, feel free to use the Q&A to offer your insights as to why you chose what you did, or why you didn't choose what you did in the other side of the equation. And let's move on, because, you know, let's start looking at answering this question. You know, it's a buzzword, and I got this from Spend Matters January 2018 article, where it says it's become a buzzword. In other words, it's all over, yet it still tends to cause some head scratching in terms of efficiency gains. I mean, why is that? Why is that, Mark?
Just taking a slightly cynical view, I think the challenge is often how we actually measure efficiency gains. As Wendy said, it's often about trying to get to headcount reduction. But what we've actually talked about in this area previously is moving a resource from a relatively low value adding aspect, which is managing data into a system, and moving it into a higher value adding activity, such as appropriate analysis, looking for insights, changing supplier bases, whatever we've actually managed to get out of it. So the interesting bit is the see an efficiency gain in one part of the system, but the place it actually comes out is somewhere else. So you create more time to do category management, but you don't actually deliver efficiency gains that's immediately associated with the system. The headcount reduction doesn't actually happen, it just moves. And that's part of the challenge in the measurements here, I think.
Well, you know, and that's an interesting point, Wendy, because I want to put this over to you as well, is that head scratching part of it. I mean, we're hearing it everywhere. There's a ubiquity, as the article refers to. But the fact is if we don't know how it improves, I mean, procurement isn't actually going to be running to embrace this. In fact, would it be safe to say, Wendy, based on your experience with IACCM and membership, is that while people are talking a lot about it, maybe not, you could correct that, but many of them don't know what to make of it, and so they're sort of leaving it as being something off into the far distant future, or maybe the mid-range future, and they're more focused on other areas that, taking to what Mark said, it creates a more fruitful or more immediate return on the investment of their time. I mean, is there a certain amount of that skepticism with robotic process automation that you find, Wendy?
Yes, I think this suffers from the same problem when you say robotics. Immediately people switch off. It's like saying smart contracts. They're not smart at all. They're quite stupid in terms of how they function. And it's a very confusing term. And I would say robotic process automation for a lot of people is just, the very name is a barrier to entry of wanting to do anything with it. And understanding how to actually engage with somebody who may be able to do the analysis that you need in terms of your processes to start with, and then bringing on board the right trusted partners to implement these processes. These represent very big challenges for people on the ground who are trying to manage their day-to-day departments and companies. They're often puzzled as to how to even begin with implementing something like this, and skeptical, as you say, that, you know, what am I going to get out of this? And there's a huge risk associated in their minds if it doesn't go well and they've got their name on it.
So basically, you know, it's the buzzword that's the problem, maybe not the direction or the intent, because again, it's a certain misnomer. Well, you know, in terms of following through on the article, let's simplify it. And I don't know if this is overly simplifying, but basically it's replacing its software capability with an existing platform. That's what you had both mentioned. You don't have to invest in new architecture or new technology to do this, but it's a type of software that mimics the very simple functions that we do on a daily basis, with the intention of freeing us up. So the mundane that you talked about, Wendy, where you're more inclined of repetitive tasks to make mistakes, you eliminate those mistakes. Is there, by the way, Wendy, is there any statistics at all at this point in time, not just in the procurement industry, but just in general industries who are the early adopters of RPA? Are there any statistics saying that this process, this technology, whatever we want to give it as a moniker, has saved us from making so many mistakes? Like, is there any data beyond the empirical or observational of RPA's benefits?
There are some in terms of document review and process in that case, using these robotic process automation, in that you get an 80% accuracy rate, 80% improved accuracy rate over a human being in terms of when you implement these type of processes. And the faster, so whereas something would be taking, if you had a document of X number of pages, you're cutting down the time exponentially, because these things can be read by machines much quicker, and then you're then bringing in natural language processing along the line here, so that the computers are being able to actually just understand what they're reading as well. Well,
Mark, before I carry on Wendy's thought, Suraj said, as per the current scenario, the strategy changes every case. So how can robotics help the same? So I guess if I understand what you're saying, Suraj, is that because strategies change on a case-by-case basis, how do you find that repetitive cycle to which Wendy had referred that can eliminate the mistakes? What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, I think it's a really, really good point, in that there seems to be a use case which is about the, sorry about this, seems to have a cat in the way. Let me move that. The use case is that we're looking for is about where we've got repetition. The challenge that we've got is how many of the activities that are currently undertaken by procurement are both repetitive and high value. And there's an interesting loop in there somewhere. Is a lot of the repetitive activities tend by their very nature to be relatively low value, and therefore the cost benefit that we're looking for is high, and the level of focus and attention we pay to that stuff tends to be restricted. We end up with brilliantly efficient, repetitive office supplies buying processes, which perhaps isn't the greatest area of value. Whereas, as the comment that came through, and when we see more complex, challenging contracting environments, they often need a lot more input to them to make some sort of sense on the way through. And there's an issue in there somewhere about, can we apply this type of analytics and data processing in a way that actually allows us to get into the high value areas of activity as well as the more standard.
Well, see, this is interesting here because I'm going to shift this a little bit, Emil and Wendy, I'm going to direct this towards you. Emil said, I believe that within larger organizations, robotics and automations are being introduced and pushed fairly aggressively. People do not necessarily see the value for something so small being automated. Change is scary, and I want to, Emil, thank you for that. The thing I want to pick on this out of this statement, Wendy, and I'll direct it to you, is change is scary because a few years ago I was moderating a panel discussion in Virginia, and Tim Cummins was over, and he had made reference to the fact that within 5 to 10 years, 40% of procurement professionals would become redundant. Now, I'm framing it like this because does robotic process automation meet a natural point of resistance or hesitation? Because not only is change potentially scary, but is it viewed as being a threat to people? I mean, obviously, if we think about it in the traditional sense, in let's say the automobile manufacturing industry, where robotic supply or robotic manufacturing processes on the floor replace many human jobs. I mean, is there that element that comes into the equation here as well? And will it replace jobs?
I do think that it already is replacing some jobs, and it will continue to do so. But I think that robotic process automation in and of itself, as closely defined, is quite limited in terms of you need these set of requirements for it to work effectively. One of them not being that things don't change much. It has to be a situation where you're just dealing with something that isn't changing on any kind of regular basis. It's the new systems that are coming in that are being developed by a rapid number of different organizations, software companies that prove to be much bigger in terms of disruption to the market, I think, particularly to the procurement process. And that is what I think people need to keep their eye on when they're involved in procurement.
All right, Emil, hopefully that gave you a little bit of perspective in there in terms of that very interesting comment. Now, let me just move to the next one. There we go. All right. And this, another one from what procurement needs to know about robotic process automation. I want to remind everybody, I've included the links to the reference articles that when you get a copy of the actual PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on them on screen and be able to actually access the articles. But again, it's just verifying, and this goes to what Wendy and you have said, Mark, in terms of you don't have to incorporate or introduce new technologies. It's not an overarching initiative that spans years. It's applications that can work on computers, laptop, and other devices. And again, the whole idea is to emulate the redundant or tedious functions of that. Now, interestingly enough, just before we move on, most RPA implementations, according to this particular source, are in claims processing and insurance and risk management in financial services because they're high volumed and structured. And I think this, Wendy and Mark, goes back to what Suraj said, is that the strategy changes every case, so how can robotics help the same? And I would probably understand that this is why these areas of insurance and financial services would utilize it. So this gives an idea of this. Now, in terms of robotic process automation, where does it fit into the scale? So, audience, get ready to respond to another poll. What emerging trends, technical or otherwise, and I want to put in otherwise there, will have the greatest impact on procurement? Will it be B2B digitalization, predictive analytics and forecasting tools, RPA, of course, what we're talking about today, cloud computing, or other? So, Malvi, if you could cue that and the Jeopardy music, we can then proceed. And the answer is, but in this process, you know, Mark and Wendy, this time I'll start with you, Wendy. What do you think the response is going to be in this poll for most people when they look at this?
Well, my money would be on the business digitalization, but to me, again, I would say this is a little bit too narrow. What's happening in terms of the processes being automated is gaining pace, as I keep mentioning, and we need to keep our eye on it, because not only are we ingesting documents, but with natural language processing, they're being able to be understood and read. We're building up this big data that we can then use to look at our processes and structures, see where the weaknesses are, and one of the benefits of that is not only like quicker, faster, more accurate processes, but learning how to develop better business practices overall, and identifying areas where there are weaknesses within your systems. So it's a bit of a long answer, I'm afraid, to your poll number 2. that isn't a luxury that people have, clicking the boxes.
Well, okay. Well, Mark, and I think that's a good answer. It gives us a certainly broader scope, which is interesting. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, interestingly, I would hope that predictive analytics and forecasting tools will move forward and give impact. And I only say that because one of the regular challenges we meet in future purchasing, delivering insights into people's procurement organizations, is the difficulty of relying on the information that's currently in place in the organization, particularly forecasting. I mean, we all know from purchasing that relying on the forecasts of volumes that are about to come up is we all smile and laugh on the way through, because it's actually comically bad everywhere, every industry, every sector, everything. No one has any idea what they're going to be buying for next year, really. So if we got somewhere where forecasting tools and predictive analytics gave us better insights into what was coming up next, I think that would be massive. But that's pretty old school. I mean, this is just saying that we can't really walk yet, let alone run.
Right.
Which is a sad indictment of, I guess, the being unkind, the success of how many billions have been spent on SAP and Oracle implementations over the last few years.
Well, now, you see, there's interesting realms here. I mean, so B2B digitalization, Wendy, is what you have for the reasons explained, and predictive analytics and forecasting tools. Now, Mark, predictive analytics, does that also include tools that, let's say, when you go out for, depending on the commodity you're purchasing. And it's interesting, we're not even going to necessarily have the time to splice down this into indirect materials, direct materials, complex contracting, whatever else. But give you an idea with MRO procurement where, if you put out a request for bid, there's been platforms which utilize advanced algorithms that would use historical data with current data of pricing and availability and delivery, and the historical data is what's been past delivery performance from that particular supplier, and based on a weighted average or a weighted formula, would be able to rank the responding bidders. And I'm just using this narrow scope of MRO. Instantaneously. So now you don't have suppliers or buyers having to go out and say, okay, I've got to call a lot of suppliers. I've got to, they can put in a catalog, for example, punch cards or punch throughs, punch outs, whatever. I mean, that is kind of exciting in and of itself. Is that an area of predictive analytics that would that fall under that category?
Yeah, I guess one part of the challenge here is actually the nomenclature can become confusing about what falls into which area. But if you think about the stream of activity that we're talking about there's elements both of robotic process automation, there's elements of predictive analytics that are in there. And if we can get all that stuff working together correctly, then we're actually in a very good space to take a lot of time and effort spent in those. If we go back to the Kraljic matrix, the bottom left corner of acquisition, or whatever people know it as, but right in that box there, right in that quadrant, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we should be able to take load out of day-to-day processing activity, remove the inaccuracies that we often see, and hopefully one day even reduce other being the thing that's the most popular thing that's being bought in any company.
All right. Well, now I just asked Malvi if you could get the results posted, but I'm getting a note back. Oh, there we go. That's what we wanted to see, the actual numbers. B2B digitization, Wendy, accounted for 21%. Predictive analytics and forecasting, 33%. Now we've got robotic process automation, cloud computing, and then the other, or no answer. Okay, so people, the ones who had no answer, let's go there. I always like to go there because it was kind of interesting. I'm a little bit surprised on the B2B digitization being 21%. The no answer, if you could, just share with us in the Q&A why no answer. Are any of these areas not important in your realm, or are we missing something in terms of that should be on there? That's where the other can come in, although no one clicked on other. So in the Q&A session, I encourage you to do that. But this is a very interesting result. I mean, what does this say to you, Mark, looking at these results? I mean, obviously, predictive analytics and forecasting, 33% falls where you are. But Wendy, are you surprised that B2B digitalization isn't a little bit higher? Or that 29% of the people, the greater response, had no answer to give? What does that tell you?
Well, I think the no answer is, it speaks to a lot of the members that I deal with. I did a recent poll out of interest, and only 10% of people were happy who had a process implemented already within their system. So those people had already gone through the whole process, implemented something, and only 10% of them were happy. The majority were not. So the fact that when we ask these sort of questions, what emerging trends do we have? What should we be looking to? I'm not surprised that there are always a group of people who are saying, I'm not entirely sure. We're calling it the Wild West amongst ourselves here at IACCM and amongst our software producers, because there are so many different solutions out there, and it is confusing, and not everybody knows where to look and what direction is the way they should be going.
Yeah. So a lot of people are sort of like paralyzed, for lack of a better word or term, is like, what does this actually mean? And that speaks to the fact is that it's a buzzword, but obviously it hasn't penetrated the procurement world. Let me ask you this, in terms of other industries, and we touched on, again, financial and such, is it having the same difficulty gaining traction in those other industries as it is in the procurement world?
Yes, I mean, I think procurement is part of, the different industries, including government that we deal with. People are trying to implement different systems to improve and adopt automation where they can. One example might be that we have actually training and different standardizations of contracts and information being disseminated by one of our members on the basis that they have so much difficulty with their the vendors. Not knowing how to actually interact with them, and there are too many different processes and issues and mistakes that they're trying to address. So people are taking parts of their organization sometimes and working on it to where they can identify something that's a known problem, and then looking for the technology to try and find the answer. But our, robotic process automation in and of itself is just such a tiny piece of the whole picture that needs to be looked at.
Well, it's interesting, Mark, I want to get to you in a minute, but just from this, now this came from another poll, and, it was the August 19th, 2016 article, interesting, or I think it's a little bit, there might be a typo, it might be a little later than that, Procurious, and it talked about 77% have none in the way of robotic process automation, 16% are piloting, and 7% are partially rolled out. Now, that doesn't show a lot of traction here, but the trends that they said over the next 10 years would be, again, digitalization of B2B connections, Wendy, and 74% in this particular poll came out with that. Process ownership and linked to procurement was followed shortly thereafter by predictive analytics and forecasting, and then RPA. So RPA came over cloud computing, mobility, global economy and millennial workforce. And again, that's why it's not just a technological question as to what areas are going to be most effective. So in the context of our poll today, and this poll result, we don't see a whole lot of movement necessarily, and it's pretty much the same old over the last year and a half since this last poll was taken. Does that surprise you, Mark?
No, I think there's an interesting piece here about how we choose to move these areas forward in an integrated way. But one of the challenges that always strikes me is that elements of this you can move forward in discrete buckets, and when you can do that, you can normally move them forward. But some of the things we're talking about here actually need a cross-business approach and a broader strategy to actually be able to move the whole thing forward, so it doesn't just fall over at the first heavy cold that someone has in the winter. So there's a real set of issues about how you actually go from individual enthusiasms into broader organizational strategy. And I think what we're seeing here is a bit of that, which is, if it was all part of an integrated whole, we'd perhaps see more movement.
Well, now this is an interesting thing, and Wendy, I'm going to put this over to your side, because when I think of robotic process automation, and when you look at predictive analytics and forecasting, my instinct tells me, well, wait a second, these aren't what you call separate, hard partitioned elements. I mean, cloud computing and mobility are obviously a key part of RPA and predictive analytics and B2B digitalization. So it's almost like, you know, is it not really trying to separate something that really can't be separated? Because, I mean, can you have digitalization of B2B connections without cloud computing and mobility? I mean, those things will obviously have an effect on the rate of adoption, would they not, Wendy? Or am I missing something here?
No, I think what is happening, and to the point made before, it's exactly right in my view that things are very siloed traditionally within organizations. You know, you have your legal, your accounting, you have your procurement people, et cetera, et cetera. And what these solutions are requiring is a cross-cultural shift in terms of adopting software now that will impact every single department and remove people out of their silos and actually force all this cross-collaboration. And the initial work that has to be done, which is crucial, and we are always underlining it with our partners on this, that you need to look at your processes first, because if you ignore the process piece and just try to ad hoc add technology on top of it, it's a recipe for disaster. Okay. You have to work out what your process is and streamline that, and then look at how to apply the technology on top of that.
So basically what we're doing is we're, to our detriment, when we look at this, including robotic process automation and all these elements, it is to our detriment that we look at it as individual or separate items, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, because you can't, it's like what the old song was, love and marriage, you can't have one without the other, although that's old-fashioned, I know, but, you know, salt and pepper, whatever you want to go. But you can't have any of these things without mobility and cloud computing and the influence of global economy, the millennial workforce. I mean, there was a study done in India where they came out and they said that most people under the age of 35 have never used a desktop PC or a portable PC, but they're all mobile devices. We have that famous Apple commercial that's playing over here in North America, where the girl's typing on her iPad or whatever, and the neighbor comes in and says, you may have seen that. You know, what are you doing on your computer? And the girl turns and says, what's a computer? I mean, so realistically speaking, we're artificially segregating all of these elements when in reality they're so intricately combined. Yeah. Albeit some of it may be by a department or divisions within an organization. But is that going to be a key factor, Mark? Is all these departments, better collaboration between both internal as well as external stakeholders, is that going to be what's going to bridge this down and compress it into a less splintered option?
You know, I think one of the most interesting change program approaches I've seen in the last few years was one that recognized that there's a broad range of stuff that has to move forward in a front to be able to deliver the overall goals that the change program was aiming for. So as in a procurement environment, if you get absolutely brilliant at purchase order processing, but you're still rubbish at supply relationship management, it's arguable that you're not really progressing forward. And I think part of what we're seeing here is there's a range of things that we have to progress forward with, but we kind of need to move forward in a wave and not peak in one particular area, because the area gets lots of attention and moves forward and lots of technology investments in it, is often then stranded by the the melee of just being crude, the melee of rubbish that's sitting behind it that can't keep up now with this peak of absolute behavior in another part of the organization. So very much looking for a wave approach that steps the whole lot forward. It tends to be, I think, more successful because you don't leave bits behind and you're actually in a more integrated space. And the thing that does become really good doesn't just fail because it's actually too good for the rest of the organization.
So what you're saying is the old garbage in or rubbish in, rubbish out kind of scenario. Doesn't matter how much you automate, there still has to be the sound processes and the framework to automate that. Otherwise, you're not going to realize the result. Suraj likes what we're saying. He agrees with us on the question that was raised. Swapnil said the relative importance changes for categories like direct material, indirect material services. Maybe ranking would provide a different view. What are your thoughts on that, Wendy, with what Swapnil had to say?
Well, I think he's right about that. The problem with these sort of broad-ranging discussions that we have is that there are exceptions, and that goes down to the point of you have to look at your own set of processes, your own particular type of business, whether it's service or materials, and work out what you need before you reach out to the marketplace and look for those solutions that are out there and are increasingly beneficial to employ.
Well, you see, this is an interesting thing, and we sort of mentioned it. This is from a recent Zygos blog, is that RPA aids in improving the procurement function by enhancing utilization of resources, automating time-consuming. I mean, it's really saying the same thing. But again, it's a very high-level view of these things. So do you think when procurement professionals hear something along this line and these polls which are so generalized, is it that old analogy of the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, if you know what I mean? And by having these 10,000-foot level discussions, we really don't get into, well, where is it really going and what's really going to happen with it? I mean, is that really the generalization? Are we right now in the stage of overly generalized terminology in areas without actually understanding the specifics of how we're going to get there? Mark?
I think, well, the elephant analogy is lovely. It is easier to eat it one teaspoon at a time, but you still need a plan of where you're going to start and what you're actually going to do right the way through the process, including the burial of the carcass afterwards, clearly. So there's a whole series of things that we need to really try and integrate better. Well, if you use the SAP and Oracle analogies, but great systems with great promise within them, and actually links into RPA anyway, because that's the next layer of activity that's happening in there. But they're still defeated by the simple human interaction of adding in things like supplier is unknown and the product that you're buying is miscellaneous, which happens in every business. Tends to be the largest category of bought products, miscellaneous.
Well, by the way, time flies when we're having a great discussion. I got to pick up the pace a little bit here because I could talk to you all day about this. 6 RPA procurement uses, and this is one of the reasons why I chose this particular article to reference, is that at least we're looking at drilling down suggestive milestones to alert to track contract utilization, expiry, payment dates, defining user-specific approval workflows, managing vendor information. I mean, all of these areas here are attempting to at least drill down, automated request generation, evaluation reporting, and flipping spend. All these, it tells me that the organizations, the industry is trying to say, okay, now we've got to take this big picture, and now we've got to try to make it into a digestible format that we understand as to where we can apply it. So I would gather, and Wendy, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but it's really, and just to reiterate, it's just the size of this vision of RPA, which is just one small piece in the overall digital transformation that organizations are talking about, that people are standing on the shore because they really don't know where to start or where to enter. I mean, is that safe to say, Wendy?
Yeah, I would exactly say that. People are looking and they're wondering where to jump in and who to engage with. what the initial conversations need to be. One of the things we're doing at the moment is a study with companies, basically listing features and benefits of their software so that we can report to our members and say, look, these are all these different companies and this is what they're doing, so that they can sort of evaluate that from their desktop, as it were, before going out to the marketplace. And as I say, unless you have the internal conversations of why we're doing this and, you know, what needs to be changed and what are our processes, you know, that's really the starting point for all of these discussions.
So in other words, with these 6 points, and there are probably many others that can be added on to this, we're actually applying paint to the canvas, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, now let's move a little bit ahead here. Okay, now why isn't this clicking for me? There we go. RPA benefits. And here's our third and final poll. In which area will procurement derive the greatest benefit from RPA? Improved operational efficiency, process optimization, improvement in compliance, better risk management. That's an interesting one. Cost reduction or other. Again, Melvie, if you could cue the poll, that would be fantastic. And as we're waiting for the response to come in, I'm going to start here. Better risk management. Is that something that you would normally equate with robotic process automation, Mark?
The interesting piece here is how you actually get, if you think about where areas of risk come for business, then it's often in areas about contracting risk that's been built into whatever's going on, using the wrong terms and conditions or whatever. And there is an element in here that with the appropriate routing of purchase orders, with the background systems that are in there, you're more likely to get the contractual environment that you're most expecting to actually be in place, together with, hopefully, the appropriate sign-off systems that are actually working. Although in there lies a danger if the systems have been badly designed in the first place, but all you end up with is highly efficient ways of letting inappropriate contracts. So you can look at it from either direction, in that we go faster, we get the right stuff built in. The risk is that we go faster with the wrong stuff built in, which doesn't really help at all. So it goes back to the whole system design that sits behind the RPA activity.
Anything to add to what Mark just said, Wendy?
Yeah, I think better risk management is such an important piece of what people have to deal with day to day at the moment, with increased regulation and then the requirements within contracting, the risk of litigation. This is definitely a focus that people have when they're managing their processes and their contracts. And in the advantage that we have with this introduction of automation is that we can track our processes more closely, and we can look at where our risks, you know, you're more exposed to risk as time goes on. You'll get the data and the feedback and the analysis that you need. And also it flags up where things are not being done that should have been done. So it's slightly more advanced than perhaps the basic robotic process or automation, but as we start to shift into more to the more complex technology, definitely the risk management is managed in far more sophisticated ways and to everybody's benefit in my personal view.
All right. Now, one thing, and I don't want to miss anyone on here. We had one comment just going back to the, where is it now? Q&A all 8. Let me see. Suraj said something along the lines of mobility in all of this. And I know this sort of takes a step back to the last category, but I don't want to miss him. But he was mentioning, and I just want to verify with both you, Mark, and Wendy, that the mobility question obviously changes the dynamics, doesn't it, overall, of the procurement process? I mean, in the context of this improved operational efficiency, process optimization. I mean, what impact does mobility have on that?
Are we thinking about mobility of individuals or?
Yeah, let's look at it like that. You know, anytime, anywhere. I mean, that's the whole thing that we're hearing with digital transformation is it empowers people to do their jobs from anytime, anywhere with mobile devices, BYOD devices. I mean, does that element that reaches back to the last section come into these areas of improved operational efficiency and process automation?
It depends whether it's Saturday afternoon and it's something else.
wait a second. Wait, so you're talking about Big Brother there saying there's no such thing as a 5-day work week. Now that you're connected, we know where you are, we know what you're doing, and we will tell you what you need to be doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, essentially, it's almost like the process starts to run the human being's existence rather than the other way around, depending on what controls are put in place.
Interesting. Well, now going to the poll results, and again referring to the article, and I would encourage all of you joining us today, when you get a copy of the electronic version at least, but you can certainly, if you get a hard copy, but the electronic version, to click on these reference links because they certainly expand and go into it. But the blog from February 6th here talked about these 5 areas, which is one of the reasons why they're included in the poll, and it goes into the details as to where each of these benefits come in. Now, I just want to touch on this because, again, we're getting down to the final 10 minutes, and I want to be able to have final closing comments and any last Q&A. But as you go through each of these slides, improved operational efficiency. I think we've touched on that already. Optimization of processes. Improvement in compliancy. What do you make of that? How does that make compliance? And the article explains it, but do you think of compliance, Mark, in the same light with RPA? Because I have to admit, improved compliancy and RPA isn't something that I naturally said, oh, well, the two are joined. I mean, is compliancy and RPA go hand in hand to a certain degree?
I think they do. We talk a lot about the impact of maverick buying off contract, buying away from contract, using favourite suppliers that aren't appropriately qualified. All the things that we see on a regular basis, and the concept of RPA, or indeed, at a simpler level, actually blocking out the ability to buy stuff that isn't appropriately contracted or checked, whether we're actually building risk into the system is significant, and therefore compliance in itself with the preferred and agreed approaches that have been developed by the business should reduce risk and should bring a benefit, because it's all about getting the alignment right. Whole bunch of caveats about did we choose the right suppliers in the first place, did the process have it, all the usual things that you can put in there. But by and large, better to be buying from agreed and identified suppliers than less structured approaches, shall we say.
Well, okay, now I got to take this to Wendy, because, if you look at this and having the compliance, and you're able to create a certain degree of transparency into the process, does this, Wendy, eliminate the contract challenges? Does it eliminate, sort of like that old, my grandfather used to be able to tell it was going to rain the next day when his left knee hurt. It takes that subjective elements out of the procurement process that leads to much greater compliance, adoption, eliminates risks along those lines. I mean, is that a safe way to look at it, Wendy?
Yes, I think you're absolutely along the right lines there, because what the data and research is showing, that human beings think they know something and actually they're relying on something which is more like instinct and not necessarily factually, you can't actually factually back up what their view is. A lot of people are basing their decisions on experience, which may or may not be relevant to a particular decision that's in place. So when you put these automated processes in place, you're guaranteeing that the people have to, the check boxes have to be, clicked in order, and all of the requirements are being taken into consideration, and then things are flagged up where a human being needs to come in and question what's going on. So it does provide a lot of fail-safe features with any given system employing this sort of technology.
Well, you see, this raises another question, though, that came to mind as well, is if we look at this, and you talk about people and procurement professionals, isn't that part of the potential element of threat or infringement of RPA or automation in terms of the procurement process? Will procurement professionals say, wait a second, I know I have this data, whether true or not. I mean, is that not seen as an infringement on what procurement professionals do, or will it reshape or redefine what procurement is all about going forward? I mean, I'll cite an old study from 11 years ago from a CPO Agenda Roundtable that they had senior executives come together from global corporations, and there was a statement made that's saying, I'd rather have one strategic thinker than 10 run-of-the-mill buyers. I mean, this was 11 years ago. Obviously, I don't know if they were anticipating RPA and the digital transformation era that we're entering now, but I mean, is this where procurement professionals have to then, in response to what you said, Wendy, have to say, wait a second, we now have to become more strategic and analytical ourselves rather than just a functional element or an extension of the organization. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think this is where training comes in as well, and change management processes come in, so people can then see the value of where they are within the organization and what they can actually contribute, because no one is going to deny the fact that, you know, people who are experienced, one of my favorite things with AI is it can complete a wonderful executed piece of chess maneuvering in a room that's on fire. And I think that's one of those things that, you know, you've got to bear in mind here, that this sort of process that we're talking about today is quite limited, and we do need these people that have the experience and can step in and are adequately trained and know how to interact and with the kind of new system that they're being asked to work with. So again, the change management piece coming in there when these things are implemented. Important to have the discussions with the people who are actually going to be working with the software at the end of the day.
Well, you know what, and I just want to touch on this last slide as we come to the last 5 minutes. Cost reduction. You know what's interesting, in previous webinars I've done where CPOs have been polled, what's interesting is in all of this, and we talk about having a seat at the table as a procurement professional, we talk about becoming more strategic in our thinking, and it's not just about how many pennies or dollars you save along those lines. But it's interesting, a poll showed that cost reduction is still the driving factor in the procurement world, especially in the context of all of these other elements here. So, I mean, relative to RPA, and I just want to touch on this 1 minute each of you, starting with Mark, you know, cost reduction, is it as simply RPA and digital transformation? Is it that you're able to buy smarter and thus negotiate better pricing? Like, where is the cost reduction? Does it extend beyond that bottom line simplified version of getting something cheaper than you could before? I mean, where is the cost savings throughout the entire chain? I'll start with you, Mark.
The big challenge we've got in procurement is moving from transaction-driven price-down activity and moving into sustained value contribution into the organisation. That's right at the heart of what we've got to aim at all of the time, is getting that journey towards that. To do that, we need to spend less time on the transactional activity, and therefore RPA should allow us, and associated systems should allow us to spend more time in value identification and delivery by whatever means it happens to be. And cost down will remain an important part of that, of course, because that's how our management teams measure us all the time, whether that's right or not, and how much education we need to do to show the value from our supply chains. That's a different set of questions. But yeah, absolutely. If we can spend less time on data processing and more time on value identification and delivery, it's got to be good for us.
And I would say that part of our research in the past has been that we've looked at the whole contracting process and identified like a 9.15% value loss through just things that could be easily fixed. We call them the 10 pitfalls. And certainly this is an important component of that. This sort of activity of producing this technology, introducing it into the system can help towards that overall cost saving.
Jon, you should know your microphone's off.
Am I back? Can you hear me now? It's the Verizon commercial. You know what's interesting, and before we get into the final slide here, Emil had a last-minute question. What is the best RPA introduced to procurement you've seen? So I'll go to you, Wendy, first, then Mark, and then we'll close.
I'm afraid I have to be neutral on this in terms of saying particular things. I know that within the financial industry, the RPA aspect has been introduced in a very beneficial fashion. I am not going to talk to a specific case study. pick one out.
Okay, let's do this. How about if I help you maintain your neutrality? Are there a large number of organizations or solutions out there in RPA, or are we just on the tip of the iceberg, and is it going to again spread out more?
No, I definitely think there are a growing number, but actually I do see this as one piece of this giant puzzle. So when we talk, there are so many other aspects, because the data analytics, the neuro-linguistic programming, it's really all out there and going so fast. I mean, when we say 10-year timescales, I think it's quicker than that. You know, we'll be surprised where we are within 3 years, let alone 10. So this is one piece that's definitely important to pay attention to, particularly in the context of your audience today.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Mark, Emil's question.
A lot of the best things I've seen have actually been relatively simple. Just chopping people out of ridiculous sign-off chains, automating those in a way that actually makes sense, speeding up the process, and relatively simple things happening well. I've also seen stuff in areas like Wendy was talking about the text reading capabilities and the analytics that sit behind that. I've actually seen some contract analytics software running where ugly clauses are brought to light more easily than is otherwise done. The machine won't fall asleep while they're reading a 200-page contract. So areas like that can be a genuine benefit. Right now, that stuff's available right now, and those areas actually can genuinely help. But again, it's not integrated. It's like little standalone applications which are able to do things that actually give benefit, rather than this sense of an overall approach that's happening. And maybe that's the right way to do it. We all use, I don't know, my phone's got about 120 apps on it, of which I use 20 of them with any competence. Maybe that is actually the way in which RPA moves, that we find different groups of things that are more appropriate to us, because for our individual roles, it's a better outcome.
There's an app for that. You know, when you said about the 200-page contract, I was thinking that's probably why instead of reading the contract, you wait for the movie. Bad joke, I know, but nonetheless. Let's conclude with this, because we're about a minute over our time. I like this, to sum it all up, I like this Aaron Levy, who's the founder of Boxnet, who did a tweet about Uber. And he said, Uber is a $3.5 billion lesson in building for how the world should work, instead of optimizing for how the world does work. And for me, I thought this was an appropriate tweet even now as it relates to robotic process optimization, because what we're looking to do is to really, honestly, say, how can we go outside of the framework of that with which we're most familiar in doing it, and how can we leverage RPA to take us into a different way in which the world should work? So that's my 2 cents into all of this. I just want to remind everyone, and my clicker is moving slow, working together is the key here. Q&As, I think we've had this. I don't think we've run overtime. Just want to remind everybody, the tweet chat is hashtag RPA 2018. And I just want to thank both Mark and Wendy for joining us and for being bold to come on camera. I mean, I know I had some hesitations for obvious reasons, but nonetheless, thank you both for joining us. And Malvi, I'd like to turn this over to you now.
Right. Thank you, John, Mark, and Wendy, for such an insightful session. I believe we had an interactive one because of the questions that people keep on asking. And thank you, everyone who just joined and stayed us for an hour. I will be sending out the copies of this webinar along with the presentation. In case you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any point of time. So thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye now.